Chapter 1. The boy from Kala. Zohran was born in a small house in Kala. His mother often told him, "Dream big, my son. Dreams are free." His father, a teacher, would smile and say, "But remember, real dreams ask for hard work." He was still a little boy when the family moved to America. They packed only what they needed and left everything else behind. His mother whispered to him on the plane, "One day, you will thank this pain. Every change brings a gift." New York was loud and fast, but for little Zohran it was full of mystery. He looked up at the tall buildings and felt both small and strong. He saw people rushing everywhere. Some looked happy, some looked lost. His father worked long hours. His mother made films and told stories about people who never gave up. At night, Zohran would sit near the window and watch the lights of the city. He whispered to himself, "One day I'll do something big for this city." He went to school and studied hard. He was smart but also kind. When other kids laughed at a classmate's accent, he stood beside that boy. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll all learn together." The teachers liked him because he helped others. But what made him different was his heart. He didn't only want to be the best. He wanted everyone to do well. His mother Mira was his biggest teacher. She told him stories about India, about love, about pain. She said, "We are not rich, Zohran, but we are rich in heart." Never forget that. He remembered those words when life became hard. His father taught him discipline. He would say, "Use your mind but never lose your soul." Those words shaped him more than any school. Sometimes he felt lost in the crowd. He saw the rich riding big cars and the poor sleeping on benches. He asked his mother once, "Why does life look so unfair?" She held his hand and said, "That's why. We must do something about it, my son." That night something changed in him. He didn't know how, but he wanted to fix what was broken. He was still very young, but he started noticing small things. A tired man waiting for a bus. Woman counting coins at a grocery store. A child crying because his mother couldn't buy him food. Every scene stayed inside him like a picture that couldn't fade. He began to dream not of money but of kindness, fairness, and peace. When he was alone, he would think of Kala, of the warm air of the place he left behind. He missed it, but he also felt thankful. He said quietly, "Maybe I was born there, but I'll grow here. Maybe this is where I'll find my reason." He didn't know that one day this reason would make him stand in front of thousands of people as their leader. Life was not easy for him or his family. There were days they had little money. There were times when his parents argued about bills. But through every hard night they stayed close. His mother would smile and say, "Tomorrow will be better." And somehow it always was. Years later, when he looked back, he understood something. All the struggle, all the change, all the small acts of kindness, they were shaping him quietly. They were preparing him for a journey he couldn't yet see. The boy from Kala was growing into a young man with a big heart. He didn't know where the road would lead, but he was sure of one thing. He would walk it with courage no matter how far it went. Chapter 2. A city of dreams and struggles. Zohran grew older, but the fire in his heart grew with him. In school he was quiet but thoughtful. Teachers said he asked too many questions. He smiled and said, "I just want to understand why the world works like this." In high school, he met friends from every background. Some came to school in cars, some came hungry. He saw the gap and felt it deep inside. One afternoon, his friend Malik whispered, "My dad lost his job. We might move away." Zohran looked down and said softly, "That's not fair. Malik, you deserve better." That night he could not sleep. He kept hearing Malik's voice. College. Zohran studied Africana studies. He wanted to learn about people, history, and freedom. He read Stories of leaders who stood for truth. He thought, maybe one day I'll try, too. But he also saw the world outside. Books. In the city streets prices were high, faces were tired, and hope was low. He watched workers rushing every morning, still struggling to live. Why does this city call itself rich? He said once, when so many can't even rest. Sometimes he worked in small offices to earn money. He saw single mothers balancing 2 jobs. He helped one woman fill a form and she said, "Thank you, son. Nobody listens to us." That small moment stayed in his heart. He felt that listening was the first step to healing. His parents were proud, but worried. One evening his father said, "Zohran, dream high, but remember, life is not easy." He replied, "I know, Baba, but if we never try, nothing will change." His mother smiled and said, "Your heart is brave, but don't let the world break it." He started visiting poor neighborhoods with friends who worked for community groups. He listened to people talk about rent bills and fear of eviction. He didn't have power yet, but he had empathy. An old man once told him, "You can't fix everything, son." Zohran answered gently, "Maybe not everything, but I can start somewhere." The old man nodded and said, "Then start with truth." Every story added weight to his spirit. Every face became a reason to act. He was no longer just studying society. He was living inside its pain. When he came home, he often sat in silence. His mother would ask, "What's on your mind?" He said, "People are losing homes, Mama. They work hard but still lose everything." She held his hand and said, "Then go, my son. Help them keep what's theirs." That night he made a decision. He didn't know how, but he wanted to fight for those voices. He wanted to be useful, not famous. He wanted to protect people like Malik, like the woman who filled forms, like the tired man who smiled even when life was heavy. He promised himself quietly, "One day I'll speak where it matters. One day I'll stand for them." The city around him was still the same, fast, noisy, expensive. But inside him, something had changed forever. The boy who once dreamed under city lights was now a young man ready to fight for light in others. He had no power, no plan, only a heart full of courage and a voice that refused to stay silent. Chapter 3. The Helper. After college, Zohran did not run toward money. He ran toward people. He found a small job, helping families who were about to lose their homes. It was not a big office or a big title, but it was a place where pain lived every day. He sat with mothers who cried over rent papers, with fathers who looked ashamed because they could not pay. He listened to them carefully. He said softly, "I can help you find a way. You are not alone." One day an old woman came in with a wrinkled letter from the bank. She could not read it well. Her hands shook. She said, "They say I must leave next week. Where will I go, son?" Zohran took her hand and said, "You will not sleep on the street while I am here." He spent the whole evening calling offices and writing appeals. When he finally saved her home, she hugged him and cried. That night he walked home tired but thankful. He whispered, "This is what I was meant to do." Every day brought a new story. Someone won, some lost. A father with 3 kids looked at him and said, "Thank you for treating me like a human." Those words cut deep. He realized how many people felt invisible in this big city. He wanted to change that. He wanted a system where no one had to beg for a roof, but helping one family at a time was never enough. For every person he saved, 10 more letters arrived the next day. He looked at the pile of papers and felt a sharp pain in his heart. He said to a colleague, "We stopped the fire, but the house keeps burning." The man nodded. "Then maybe you should change the rules, not just fight the results." That sentence stayed in Zohran's mind, like a seed waiting to grow. He started attending community meetings after work. He listened more than he spoke. He heard mothers talk about rent that ate half their salary. He heard drivers say they spent hours on buses just to earn a little. He looked around and thought, all this hard work and still people can't live in peace. That anger did not make him bitter. It made him brave. One evening his mother called and asked, "You sound tired. Zohran, are you okay?" He replied, "I am tired, Mama, but it's a good tired. I feel alive when I help someone." She paused and said, "You were born to serve, my son, but service needs strength too. Take care of your heart." He smiled and promised her he would. Months passed. His name slowly spread among the poor as the young man who listened. Sometimes people waited outside his office just to thank him. One man said, "You saved my house, but you also saved my faith." That night Zohran cried quietly, not out of sadness but because he finally understood his purpose. He was not made for comfort. He was made for people. Still he felt powerless against bigger forces. Banks, laws, and politics decided who won and who lost. He thought, what if I could be inside those rooms where decisions are made? That question started haunting him. He talked to a friend who worked in local activism. She said, "You should come to a meeting tonight. It's about housing rights." He went, sat in the back and listened. For the first time he saw ordinary people trying to change laws. Something clicked inside him. He thought, if they can, why not me? After the meeting he stood outside with that friend. She asked, "So what did you think?" He answered slowly, "I think I found where I belong." That night he wrote in his journal, "Helping is good, changing is better. I will change it." From that day forward, his work was no longer just a job. It was training for a future he could not yet see. The people he met, the tears he wiped, the words he heard, all became his teachers. He was not born powerful, but every act of kindness made him stronger. When he went to sleep he whispered, "I don't know what tomorrow brings, but if it lets me serve again, that's enough." He did not know that tomorrow was bringing his next big step, the world of politics. Chapter 4. The Voice of the People. Zohran's life changed the day he walked into that small community hall. The air was full of tired voices but strong hearts. People were not rich or powerful. They were teachers, drivers, mothers, and old men. They were talking about rent, jobs, and broken promises. Zohran sat quietly in the back and listened. A woman stood up and said, "They raise our rent but not our pay. How long can we live like this?" No one answered, but her pain filled the room. After the meeting Zohran went to her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you spoke for all of us. I want to help." She looked surprised. "You're too young, son. The world doesn't listen." He smiled and said, "Then we'll make it listen." That was the moment he became one of them. Not an observer but a fighter. He joined a small group that called itself the People's Voice. They had no money, only hope. They printed flyers, knocked on doors, and spoke in parks. Zohran learned to talk from the heart. He would say, "I don't promise miracles. I promise to fight." People listened. Some smiled, some cried, but everyone felt his honesty. Soon more people began to call him for help. A taxi driver said, "You talk like us." A young mother said, "No one ever explained things so simply." He knew then that truth did not need fancy words. It needed courage. His parents worried. One night his mother asked, "Zohran, you're spending all your time with strangers. What if politics breaks you?" He held her hand and said, "Mama, politics won't break me if I remember why I started." His father added, "Then, never forget power must serve people, not silence them." Those words became his compass. He faced anger too. Some men laughed at him. "You're dreaming too big," they said. He answered, "Dreams are the only thing poor people can afford." Others warned him, "Stay quiet if you want peace." He replied, "Peace built on fear is not peace." Days turned into months. He attended rallies, wrote speeches, and stood beside people who had lost everything. One afternoon, an old man with shaking hands told him, "Son, we have shouted 4 years. No one hears us." Zohran looked straight into his eyes and said, "Then I'll shout with you until they do." The old man smiled through tears. Soon, people started calling him our voice. They said, "He listens." They said, "He doesn't lie." He became a small light in a large city of silence. When he spoke, people felt hope. When he walked, children ran beside him. A woman once touched his arm and said, "Don't change when you win." He answered, "Winning means nothing if I forget you." One evening he stood before a crowd, under a weak microphone. His voice trembled, but his message was clear. "We don't need heroes," he said. "We need honesty. If they shut the doors, we'll stand outside. If they hide the truth, we'll speak louder, because this city belongs to its people." The crowd clapped, not because it was loud, but because it was true. That night, as he walked home, he thought of every face he had met. The old woman, the taxi driver, the child waving from the crowd. He whispered to himself, "They believe in me. Now I must believe in myself." The boy who once helped quietly was now speaking for thousands. He had no fear left, only love, the kind that moves hearts and changes lives. And this love would soon take him to his first big fight, an election that would test his faith and his promise. Chapter 5. The First Victory. The idea of running for office began like a whisper. One evening, his friends from the People's Group said, "Zohran, you should stand in the next election." He laughed softly. "Me? I don't even own a suit." They smiled and said, "That's exactly why people will trust you." For days he thought about it. He looked at the same faces he had seen in meetings, the tired workers, the mothers, the young men who still believed in fairness. One night he told his parents. His mother placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "If your heart says yes, then go." His father nodded. "Just remember who you are when the lights get bright." He began his campaign with almost nothing. No rich donors, no big banners, only belief. He printed a few flyers himself and walked door to door. Some doors closed, some open with cautious eyes. He would smile and say, "I am Zohran. I want to fight for rent fairness and free buses. I want our city to work for everyone." Sometimes people invited him in for tea. Sometimes they said, "No one ever came to ask before." Those words gave him strength. He worked long days. He walked until his legs hurt. He slept little, but each handshake felt like fuel. A woman told him, "My son can't afford his college books. Will you really help people like us?" He looked straight at her and said, "Yes, because I am people like you." His small team was full of volunteers. Students, retired men, and single mothers helped him make calls and knock on doors. They had no uniforms, but they had unity. Every night they met in a small room, eating cheap sandwiches, sharing stories, laughing through exhaustion. One evening a student said, "Do you think we can win?" Zohran smiled. Winning is not only a number. Winning is when people believe again. Still, fear visited him often. He would stare at the list of his opponents, powerful names, famous faces. He whispered, "Maybe I'm too small." Then he remembered the old woman who said, "Don't change when you win." He smiled and thought, "I already have something they don't." Truth. Election week arrived like a storm. The nights were long, full of hope and doubt. He stood at a street corner, handing out leaflets. A little boy tugged his sleeve and said, "My mom says, you're the good man." Zohran bent down, smiled and said, "Then, tell your mom she's right." On the final day, his team gathered around a small television to watch. Results. Silence filled the room. Number after number appeared on the screen. He was behind, then ahead, then behind. Again. His heart raced. Suddenly the announcer said his name. Winner. For a moment no one moved. Then tears, laughter and hugs filled the room. Someone shouted, "We did it." Zohran covered his face and whispered, "It was never about me. It was about us." He called his parents. His mother cried, "I knew you'd do it, my son." His father said, "Now the real work begins." He looked out the window that night and saw lights across the city. He felt not pride but duty. "These lights," he said softly, "belong to the people who trusted me." The next morning he went to the same streets where he once handed flyers. People waved. Taxi drivers honked. An old woman hugged him and said, "Don't forget our pain now that you've won." He answered, "Your pain built this victory. I'll carry it with me." He was no longer just a helper. He was now a representative of thousands. His journey had begun from small rooms and broken hearts, and now it stood inside government walls. But deep inside he stayed the same, the boy from Kala who wanted to make things right. Chapter 6. Standing for Truth. After the victory, Zohran stepped into a new world. The same people who once ignored him now smiled for photos. Reporters called his name, but he did not feel powerful. He felt heavy with the promises he had made. On his first day in office he looked at his chair and said softly, "This is not a throne. It's a responsibility." He began working the same way he had always lived, close to the people. He met tenants who feared rent hikes, teachers who needed better pay, and drivers who spent more on fuel than food. He sat with them, listened, and said, "We can fix this. Maybe not in one day, but together." Soon, he introduced new ideas: rent freezes, free bus programs, fair tax policies. But big companies were not happy. Wealthy men in suits called him a dreamer. One said, "You don't understand how the system works." Zohran smiled and replied, "Maybe it's time the system understands how people live." He refused to take donations from rich lobbyists. He refused luxury cars. When his team asked why, he said, "If I sit in comfort while they suffer in cold, I have already lost." His simple life became his identity. But standing for truth was never easy. Some newspapers called him dangerous. Some politicians said he was dividing the city. He stayed calm. In one meeting, when an opponent shouted, "You're too young to teach us about justice," Zohran said gently, "Justice doesn't need age. It needs courage." The room went silent. Outside politics, another storm was growing. The world was watching the war in Palestine. Zohran could not stay silent. He spoke from his heart. No child, he said, should lose sleep to the sound of bombs. Some people cheered him, some hated him for it, but he never changed his words. He said, "Justice must not depend on geography." One night his mother called and asked, "Are you safe, my son?" He replied softly, "Mama, truth is never safe, but I can't live by fear." She paused, then said, "Then speak and let your voice heal." He promised her, "I will." Days turned into battles. Social media burned with his name. Some tried to paint him as extreme, but those who truly listened understood. He was speaking from love. He wanted peace for every child, no matter the border. When a reporter asked, "Why risk your career for this issue?" he answered, "Because silence is also a choice, and I choose not to be silent." In his office he kept a notebook filled with names of the people he had met. Beside each name he wrote what they had said. One line read, "Thank you for seeing us." Another said, "Don't forget us when the world gets loud." He would open that book on hard days and whisper, "I haven't forgotten." One afternoon a group of students came to meet him. They said, "Sir, you give us hope. How do you stay strong when people attack you?" Zohran smiled and said, "I don't fight for fame. I fight for faces, the ones I can't forget." His voice trembled, but his heart was steady. His honesty began to inspire even his critics. Slowly people saw that he wasn't chasing power. He was protecting values. He wanted the city to be fair, not perfect, just fair. A mother wrote him a letter. "My son now believes that good people can win." He read it and closed his eyes. "This," he whispered, "is why I keep going." Late one night, alone in his office, he looked out at the lights of New York. The same lights he had seen as a child. Full of dreams. He said quietly, "Maybe I can't change the whole world, but I can change one city. And that's a start." His courage made others brave. His truth made others honest. He was no longer just a politician. He had become a symbol, a reminder that kindness can lead and truth can win even in a noisy world. Chapter 7. The People's Mayor. The idea of running for mayor came slowly. One night his close friend said, "Zohran, people trust you. Why not take one more step?" He smiled and shook his head. "Mayor, that's too big for me," his friend replied. "Not for you. For them." That word "them" echoed in his mind for days. He thought about the families he met, the ones still waiting for rent justice, the young men who still could not afford college, the tired workers who still rode long buses home. He felt their eyes on him. He whispered, "Maybe I owe them one more fight." When he announced his decision, many called him foolish. "You can't beat the rich," they said. "You'll be crushed." He answered softly, "Then let me be crushed for the right reason." His team started again from nothing. Just like the first campaign. No big donors, no fancy offices, just truth. Printed in small letters carried by big hearts. He walked through neighborhoods shaking hands, smiling, listening. A woman said, "You came again." Others, "Forget after winning." He replied, "I can't forget the hands that lifted me." A taxi driver stopped his car to hug him. "My children talk about you at dinner," he said proudly. These small moments became his real power. Every speech he gave was full of emotion, not noise. He would say, "This city belongs to those who build it, not to those who buy it." Crowds shouted his name. Some cried. Some prayed. Hope was back. Reporters began to ask, "Why are so many people following him?" One volunteer said, "Because he listens like a friend and speaks like a brother." His opponents mocked him. "He's too soft." One said, "He talks about feelings, not business." Zohran answered calmly, "Business builds walls. Feelings build bridges." That line spread everywhere. People printed it on posters. Campaign days were long and full of pressure. There were interviews, debates, and sleepless nights. But whenever he felt tired, he remembered the letters from ordinary people. One said, "You're the first one who made me believe that honesty can win." He kept that letter in his pocket every day. During one debate, a reporter asked, "What's your plan for the rich who might leave the city if you raise taxes?" He looked straight at the camera and said, "If you can afford to leave, you can afford to share." The audience stood up and clapped. He didn't smile. He just looked down and whispered, "For you, Baba. For you, Mama. For everyone who never had a voice." As election day came closer, fear mixed with hope. His mother called and said, "You've already won, my son, because you never lied." He replied, "Still I want to see the people smile again." That final night, crowds filled the streets. They sang his name. When results appeared on the screen, the room went silent. Then someone shouted, "He did it." People cried, laughed, and hugged strangers. Zohran stood on the stage, tears in his eyes, and said, "A life of dignity should not be a privilege for the few. It must be a right for all." He thanked the crowd and looked around. "You made this possible," he said. "You are the voice that rose again." Someone from the crowd shouted, "We love you, Zohran." He smiled and replied, "Then love each other too." That's how cities heal. That night the boy from Kala became the mayor of New York City, not by money but by hearts. The streets that once ignored him now echoed his name, but he knew it wasn't fame he had earned. It was faith, and faith was heavier than any crown. He looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "This is for everyone who was told they were too small to matter. Now they know they do." Chapter 8. The City Reborn. The morning sun touched the windows of City Hall, but Zohran was already awake before it rose. He looked at himself in the mirror and whispered, "Power changes people if they forget why they came." He put on his simple jacket instead of a suit and stepped outside. The guards tried to stop the people from coming near him, but he said gently, "Let them come. I am one of them." As he walked toward the building, an old cleaner sweeping the steps smiled at him and said, "We trust you, sir. Please don't become like the others." Zohran paused, looked into his eyes, and replied, "If I do, remind me who I was." Those words became the start of his first day as the mayor of New York. He didn't throw a party or invite the rich. Instead, he gathered teachers, drivers, nurses, and factory workers in one big hall. "This seat doesn't belong to me," he said softly. "It belongs to all of you." A teacher stood and said, "We have waited for someone who listens." Zohran nodded. "Then speak and I will listen." From that day he began working nonstop. He didn't wait for months or even weeks. Within days he froze rent for struggling families. He launched cheaper bus programs for workers. He created a special fund for single mothers who had lost jobs. "We can't fix the city in a year," he said, "but we can start fixing hearts today." Many people laughed at him. Some rich businessmen called him a dreamer. One said on live TV, "He doesn't understand how cities make money." Zohran replied calmly, "Cities don't make money. They make lives." That line went viral across America. People clapped in their homes while watching the news. But every success brought new enemies. His phone was full of threats. Some warned him to stop helping poor people or lose support. He told his friend, "If I bend now, they'll never believe again." His friend sighed, "You're risking everything." Zohran smiled. "Then I'll lose it all, but not my truth." At night he would often call his mother. "Mama," he said, "sometimes I feel small against such big powers." She replied softly, "You are not small, my son. You are standing in a storm, and storms only hit strong trees." He smiled quietly and said, "Then I'll keep standing." Days turned into weeks and his program started changing lives. People who once slept on streets got small homes. Mothers who once skipped meals for children now cooked again. Man met him in a crowded lane and said, "You gave me back my house." Zohran shook his head. "No, you gave me back my purpose." His honesty became news around the world, but his voice became even louder when he spoke about justice outside America. In a public speech he said, "No child should sleep in fear of bombs." The room fell silent. He continued, "You don't have to be Palestinian to stand for Palestine. You just have to be human." Some people cheered. Some turned against him. But he didn't change his words. One reporter asked, "Why risk your position for another country?" He replied, "Because silence is also a choice, and I will never choose silence." That night his mother called again. "You spoke from your soul," she said. He replied, "Sometimes the soul speaks louder than politics." As months passed, the city began to change. Not just its rules but its heart. People began helping one another. Volunteers formed small neighborhood groups. Students started collecting clothes for the poor. A boy stopped him one day and said shyly, "Sir, when I grow up, I want to be kind like you." Zohran smiled, touched his shoulder and said, "Then the city is already safe." Even his critics began to soften. A rich businessman once came to him and said, "I didn't believe in you, but my driver told me how you changed his life. Now I do." Zohran simply smiled. Change doesn't ask for belief. It happens quietly. He kept his office simple. On his table were no awards, only letters from people. One said, "You helped my mother when no one else did." Another said, "Because of you I feel proud to live here." He would read them before sleeping and whisper, "This is my salary." One night he was working late. His old notebook from youth slipped out of a drawer. On the first page in faded ink were the words, "Help someone every day, even if no one sees it." He stared at it for a long time. Then he wrote below it, "And if they do see it, remind them to help too." The next morning he met his father for lunch. His father looked older but peaceful. "You kept your soul clean, my son," he said. Zohran smiled and replied, "Because you and Mama taught me that money can buy chairs, not respect." Later that week, a massive crowd gathered for his one-year celebration as mayor. Reporters waited for a grand speech, but he spoke softly. A life of dignity should not be a privilege for the few. It must be a right for all. People clapped. But he raised his hand and said, "Don't thank me. Thank yourselves for believing again." A woman in the front shouted, "We love you, Zohran." He smiled and replied, "Then love each other too. That's how cities heal." The crowd fell silent, touched by his words. As he walked off the stage, he looked at the sky. The same sky he had seen as a little boy in Kala. The same dreams that once looked impossible were now real. He whispered, "We did it, little one. We made it here." That night he wrote one final note in his book. A city is not built by hands but by hearts. When hearts unite, the city is reborn. He closed the book, placed it beside his old campaign flyers and smiled. Outside, the people were still celebrating, laughing, hugging strangers. Hope had come home again. New York City was not just alive, it was reborn. And at its heart stood a man who had never stopped believing in love, in fairness, and in people. Join our membership for exclusive English stories. The end.